Get out because I'm moving in with my family. Jeff pointed at us and loudly declared while my in-laws were giving instructions to the movers. His face twisted maliciously, and I couldn't help but show my disgust. However, Stacy next to me reacted differently, asking Jeff with confusion, "Dad, you didn't know?" Hearing this, Jeff was visibly puzzled. Stacy seemed so flustered that not only Jeff but also his mother and father stopped what they were doing and looked over at us. But Nicole continued to give instructions to the movers, seemingly uninterested in the situation. Despite my dismay at the behavior of Jeff's family, I was determined to reveal a certain truth. My name is Dina Anderson, a 46-year-old remote worker. I have a husband and a daughter, leading a typical life. After several dates, Jeff proposed to me 3 years into our relationship. Having a frequently ill mother, I wanted to marry as soon as possible to give her peace of mind, so I accepted Jeff's proposal. Sometime after our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. Jeff was truly happy, eagerly looking forward to seeing our child. When our daughter Stacy was born, Jeff took an active role in parenting, and I lived happily. However, I had some worries. The biggest concern was about my mother. Her health improved upon seeing her grandchild, despite being almost bedridden before, and she visited us often. Initially, she visited frequently, but as Stacy entered middle school, my mother's health visibly declined. I quit my job to be available for my mother, choosing remote work. This decision allowed me to fully take care of my mother's hospital admissions and discharges by the time Stacy graduated middle school. My mother was very happy when we visited her. I hoped she would gradually recover and be able to go out as before. However, around this time, Jeff's behavior began to change. Initially, he was willing to help with my mother's care, but lately, he had become grumpy, complaining that I wasn't paying attention to him. "Going to your mother's again? You don't care for me when I'm tired from work, but you always look after your sick mother. I wish I were sick too." He would say such incomprehensible things, and even when Stacy and I tried to appease him, he strongly rejected our efforts. Worried about both my mother and Jeff, Stacy took over caring for Jeff. "Mom, leave Dad to me. You should go to Grandma's sooner," Stacy said with a smile, and I always relied on her. One day, while living this way, I received a call from my sister-in-law, Nicole. "You've been neglecting my brother lately," she accused out of the blue, making me stare at my phone screen in surprise. I wondered if there was a mix-up, but Nicole's name was clearly displayed on my phone screen. Confused by the baseless accusation, I could only deny it. "It's been a while, Nicole. What's going on all of a sudden?" "I haven't been neglecting Jeff." I was clueless as to why Nicole would say such a thing. "Don't play dumb. I've heard it from my brother. Lately, you've been neglecting the house to care only for your own mother. Can you still proudly call yourself a wife?" Indeed, I had been focusing more on my ill mother lately, but I never thought Jeff would tell Nicole about it. However, I wasn't neglecting our home. Stacy helps with the household chores when she gets back from school, and I manage both my work and my mother's care along with the housework. Lately, I did feel like Jeff's complaints had increased, but they were about trivial things like wanting to eat at expensive restaurants or not liking the smell of the laundry detergent, things we couldn't do much about. I was not neglecting the household chores. Just as I was about to explain in detail, Nicole said something shocking. "Unfortunately, this has reached our parents too. Someday, our angry mother might come to scold you." Leaving me with those irrational words, Nicole hung up immediately. Surprised by the unexpected turn of events, I was speechless until Stacy spoke to me. "Mom, I'm home." "What happened? You look stunned." Regaining my composure, I told Stacy, who had just returned from school, about the conversation. Stacy, too, was shocked and incredulous, sighing in disbelief. "Hey, Mom. There's something I've been thinking about for a while. Can I talk to you about it? Nervously, I nodded to Stacy's serious request. Listening to Stacy's concerns made me feel truly disheartened. During a period filled with Jeff's nonsensical complaints and Nicole's harassing calls, my in-laws finally took action. One day, after visiting my mother, I came home to find my mother-in-law cooking in the kitchen. Entering the living room, I was so surprised that I dropped my things and just stood there, staring at her. Noticing me, my mother-in-law frowned and approached. "Oh, you're back. How's your mother?" "Well, have a seat anyway." Feeling her irritation, I had no choice but to follow her past me to our living room sofa, where I received a lengthy lecture. Initially, she scolded me for my attitude towards Jeff and berated me for neglecting my household duties and making my husband do chores. However, I noticed some inconsistencies in her lecture and corrected her. "Mother, there are some misunderstandings. I have never made Jeff do the household chores. In fact, Jeff hardly helps at all. Embarrassingly, it's Stacy who helps me out." Hearing this, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up, pointed at me, and started shouting. "Do you think that lie will work on me? Are you saying that child is lying to me? What a terrible daughter-in-law. That's enough." With her face red with anger, she stormed out, leaving the stove on and everything behind like a tempest. I hurried to turn off the stove so I couldn't chase after my mother-in-law. That day, Jeff was in a strangely good mood, almost unnervingly generous. He kept cutting me off every time I tried to start a conversation. Stacy also seemed puzzled by this, so we decided to stay silent and watch the situation for now, not wanting to upset Jeff. For a few days, Jeff continued to be in a good mood without any issues. Thanks to that, I was able to take care of my mother without feeling uneasy. However, a few days later, my mother quietly passed away. Stacy and I, though engulfed in sadness, managed to get through the funeral and decided to spend some time sorting through my mother's belongings at her house. I had wanted Jeff to help, but mentioning it made him sullen for the first time in a while. So, Stacy and I proceeded with the task, and naturally, the house was filled with memories of my mother, making it difficult to make much progress as each item reminded us of her. I reluctantly contacted Jeff and ended up staying at my mother's house for the night, but he seemed to be in a good mood. "Take your time and relax since you're already there," he said, but with Stacy's school and my work, it wasn't that simple. For the time being, I told him we would return home the next day and decided to rest for the night. The next day, after making some progress with the sorting, we decided to go back to our house. As we approached our home, I noticed a large truck parked in front of the house. Wondering what it was, I realized it was a moving truck, with Jeff and my mother-in-law directing the unloading. "What's going on here?" I ran up with Stacy to stop them, but Jeff stepped forward, puffing out his chest as he noticed us. "What, you're back already? It's too late for you to return now." "What?" As I stood there in shock, watching the belongings being moved into the house, Jeff crossed his arms and continued proudly. "I'm moving in with my family, so you two need to leave." While the movers were receiving instructions from my in-laws, Jeff pointed at us and loudly declared. His face twisted maliciously, and I couldn't help but show my disgust. However, Stacy, standing next to me, asked Jeff with confusion, "Dad, you didn't know?" Hearing this, Jeff was visibly puzzled. Stacy seemed so flustered that not only Jeff but also his mother and father stopped what they were doing and looked over at us. But Nicole continued to give instructions to the movers, seemingly uninterested in the situation. Despite my dismay at the behavior of Jeff's family, I was determined to reveal a certain truth. "Forgotten? This house is mine." The in-laws were shocked, and Jeff began to panic, turning pale. Even Nicole stopped directing the movers and confronted me. "What are you talking about?" There's no way you could afford to build such a fine house. Now it was my turn to respond with confidence. Thank you for the compliment. This house was built by my father, and originally, it's my family home. That can't be true. This house is so beautiful, it looks almost brand new. Does it look that way? Thank you, Mother. My mom renovated it for us as a wedding gift. Jeff should know about this. I couldn't understand how it could have been forgotten, but this house is naturally in my name, and the renovation costs were covered by my mother. She moved out happily to an apartment so that we could live here happily for a long time. Jeff and I went to thank my mother and even discussed living together. Jeff, who tends to forget things that don't suit him, seemed to realize that his plan had failed. And, just as I was about to speak, Stacy began to share information she learned from the inheritance process. Grandma left a lot of assets for me and Mom, but it's not money. It's things like land and apartments that can't easily be converted into cash. Hearing this, Jeff turned to his parents with shining eyes, and Nicole raised her hand in joy. Wait a minute. I had no idea your mother had so much wealth. You never said anything about this when we got married. Jeff's outburst led his family to start complaining selfishly. What's that? Isn't that like marriage fraud? That's terrible. You intentionally kept quiet because you didn't intend to give Jeff any of the property. What a greedy woman. And from the conversation earlier, it sounded like only you two would inherit everything. My father-in-law, who noticed the most crucial part, looked at us, and I nodded clearly while explaining the situation. Yes, the inheritance is divided between Stacy and me only. Jeff gets nothing. We found the will while sorting through the belongings yesterday. Hearing this, Jeff's family turned red with anger, especially his mother, who was the most furious. This can't be allowed. We'll get a divorce then. I'll make sure to get compensation from you. As his mother screamed in anger and frustration, I accepted her reaction without hesitation. Yes, I agreed to the divorce. The moment I agreed, his mother turned around and ran off, presumably to the city office, which is probably close by, to get a divorce form. I deliberately did not stop her angry departure and watched her leave. As I watched his mother head to the office, Jeff asked me grumpily, "Hey, what are you planning to do now?" "What do you mean? Are you talking about the divorce or where you will live?" "Both." Jeff almost snapped at me, but I looked up at the house indifferently. "This house is actually already on the market," I said, which surprised Jeff. "What?" Confused by my words, Jeff looked puzzled. He exchanged looks with his father and then looked back at me. He didn't seem to understand what I meant. Of course, it was to be expected. While we were spending another night at my mother's house, there was no way Jeff and his family could have imagined that I was selling this house. Facing the puzzled Jeff and his family, I once again spoke up with confidence. "I've always felt it. Every time you treated me terribly, I wondered why I married you. I put up with it for Stacy's sake. But even Stacy said she couldn't take it anymore with you." Jeff, faced with this shocking truth, turned pale and looked at Stacy. Then Stacy firmly met Jeff's gaze and voiced her thoughts. "Dad, you always said it was sad to be ignored as the head of the house, or to be belittled after coming home tired from work. But don't you think there's a reason you're treated that way? Why don't you realize that you're neglecting and belittling us?" Stacy's pointed words left Jeff speechless. I thought if he just silently signed the divorce papers, sulking away, I would have nothing more to say. Just as I was thinking this, Nicole blurted out something shocking. If I knew it would come to this, I wouldn't have bothered with the renovation." Everyone present was taken aback by this sudden confession, looking at Nicole all at once. I was surprised not only that Jeff and my father-in-law were unaware of Nicole's actions, but also by her statement itself. "Why would you do something like that without permission?" yelled my father-in-law, to which Nicole started making excuses without much concern. I wanted to live in my ideal room, okay? So I thought, why not take over this house and renovate it while we're at it? But you're selling the house, right? Oh, but if you're selling it, why not renovate it and sell it for more? Nicole's nonchalant and cheery demeanor as she said this made Stacy and me sigh. Not only were we dismayed, but Jeff and my father-in-law felt the same, with Jeff clenching his fists in suppressed anger. Finally, unable to tolerate Nicole's recklessness, he began to yell, "Hey, Cess, even if it's going to be sold or become ours, you should have told us first. We were preparing to move. Where were we supposed to live during the renovation?" Though his preamble was a bit off, his point was valid, leaving Nicole surprised. "Oh, really?" As Nicole responded, Jeff was about to yell again when we saw my mother-in-law running towards us from a distance. It seemed she had brought the divorce papers. "I got it, the divorce papers. Now, sign it right here." Despite being out of breath and excited, my mother-in-law, who was handing me the divorce papers, was unaware of the commotion that had just occurred. But that didn't matter to me. I took the divorce papers from her and handed them to Jeff. "You write it. After all the times you've belittled me, you agree to our divorce, right?" "No way." Jeff immediately refused, possibly because he knew about my mother's inheritance. However, I couldn't tolerate Jeff's behavior and his family's strange antics any longer. So, I provoked him, aiming to get him to write the divorce papers. "Changing your tune so suddenly? I guess you've been in a good mood lately because you were thinking of taking over my house, right? Too bad." Even without my mother's inheritance, I had no intention of handing over this house, and it's already planned to be sold. Either way, you'll end up homeless. At my words, Jeff looked bitterly at the divorce papers. Trying to control his anger and calm himself, I knew too well the points that would set Jeff off. "It might be a disgrace to you, but if you sign this divorce paper, I might feel a bit relieved." I figured that by demanding from a position of superiority, Jeff would easily be swayed to do as I wished, given his condescending view of me. This statement was born from such thoughts, but indeed, it contained many of my true feelings. As expected, Jeff's face turned red with anger, and he snatched the divorce papers from my hand, starting to write immediately. "If you insist so much, I'll give you your divorce." I felt a sense of relief at Jeff's hasty action. I had worried that he might reconsider and calm down, but Jeff was simple after all. After receiving the half-completed divorce papers, I filled in my part to prevent any further unexpected events and completed it. I then entrusted the finished divorce papers to Stacy and turned back to Jeff's family. "All that's left is to submit this to the city office. So take all the stuff you brought in with you." "Wait a minute, are you serious? You said you'd feel relieved if Jeff signed the divorce papers." "That's correct, but I never said I'd agree to the move." "What about the renovation?" "What renovation?" Unaware of the renovation discussed in her absence, my mother-in-law, standing next to my father-in-law, grabbed Nicole after receiving an explanation. A big argument started, and while my father-in-law and Jeff tried to intervene, I attempted to leave with Stacy. However, Jeff and Nicole, determined not to let us escape, grabbed at us, but the movers, who had been watching the situation with dismay, stepped in to mediate. Amid the chaos, we heard the sound of police sirens. Protected by the movers, I looked around and noticed neighbors gathered, drawn by the noise. Seeing a police car approaching with its red lights flashing, someone from the neighborhood must have called them, and we felt relieved. But that relief was short-lived as Jeff's entire family seemed about to attack us. Just in time, the police intervened and we were safe. Despite being stopped by the police, Jeff's family's commotion didn't cease, and another officer had to escort us into a police car to calm the situation. Nicole, mistaking our being escorted for an arrest, attempted to throw belongings into the house and was naturally stopped by the police, with additional support arriving to finally quell the disturbance. As Jeff's family began to calm down, the police asked us to accompany them for questioning, leading to further troubles when either Jeff, Nicole, or both acted against the officers. They were arrested for obstructing official duties and taken away in police cars that had arrived for backup. Jeff's parents were also scolded by the police and taken to the station for questioning. We watched the entire ordeal from the police car, where we gave a brief statement. Eventually, Jeff and I officially divorced. The divorce, initially resisted by Jeff even after signing the papers, was prolonged, but thanks to a lawyer, we were able to finalize it smoothly. Soon after, my house found a buyer and I was able to secure the money from the sale. Nicole was pushing for a renovation, but the house had already been renovated when my mother passed it down to me, so a buyer quickly appeared. Afterward, my in-laws were not prosecuted, but they cannot return to the house I inherited. And they had sold their own house expecting to move into mine, leaving them without a place to live. Furthermore, due to the commotion, they have become outcasts in the community, struggling to find a place to belong. It's inevitable given the extent of the uproar they caused. My claim for compensation has further cornered Jeff's family. The incident became well known at Jeff's workplace, leading to a pay cut followed by his voluntary resignation. Now, he is working day jobs to make compensation payments to me and, though only for a short while, child support for Stacy. Naturally, balancing income and expenses is difficult, and he seems to be juggling multiple jobs to keep up with the payments. Nicole, after the dust settled, continued working as a beauty consultant as if nothing had happened. However, rumors of the incident reached her customers and eventually the upper management, leading to her dismissal. She had been living a flashy lifestyle, so her savings quickly dwindled. Like Jeff, she is now working multiple jobs to make ends meet, including the compensation payments to me. As for my in-laws, it seems there was some trouble after the incident, leading to their divorce, and now they are living separately. The mother-in-law, now ostracized by the neighbors, was fired from her part-time job. The father-in-law, who was planning to enjoy his retirement with his pension, has had to allocate most of it to the compensation payments to me and is now looking for work despite his age. They are each in a difficult situation, but this is their reparation to us, and I hope they take this time to reflect. On the other hand, Stacy and I have moved to a new house, so even if Jeff's family tries to approach Stacy's school, it's no issue since she has already transferred. Continuing my work from home and thinking about spending peaceful days ahead with Stacy naturally brings a smile to my face. Feeling liberated from our past troubles, I plan to live happily with Stacy, just the two of us. If you won't listen to me, I'm not above considering divorce. With such a self-centered statement from my husband, I've come to feel that I no longer want to be involved with him. I've decided to accept the option of divorce that he proposed. He looked at me contentedly, unaware of what the future holds. My name is Amy. I'm 35 years old, married for 5 years, and living with my husband. We've been wanting children but haven't been blessed with any. We considered fertility treatments, but ultimately decided to wait for it to happen naturally due to my husband's views. Even if we can't have children, living our lives together is a life in itself, he said, which lightened my heart a bit. After we got married, both of my husband's parents passed away one after the other, so we didn't have time to focus on treatment. Truth be told, my husband has always been bossy. We were originally a boss and a subordinate at work. In front of relatives, he calls me a foolish wife and scolds me harshly for any mistakes. This relationship has continued even after we became husband and wife. Saying this might make my husband seem like a bad person, but he has his kind moments too. When he was my superior, he would give me precise advice and guidance during work failures or difficulties, and he has thanked me for my efforts. One particularly memorable moment was when he encouraged me after I lost my beloved grandfather, which deepened our relationship and eventually led to our marriage. After marriage, I quit my job to become a housewife. Amy, I'm home. Welcome back. You must be tired. My husband comes home after 9 p.m. His responsibilities as a manager are heavy, and he works late almost every day. You've had a tough day again. Thank you for your hard work, I would say as I tidy up his clothes and socks. He sinks into the sofa, too tired to reply, and remains quiet. This has become his daily routine. I start preparing dinner so he can eat as soon as possible. Once the meal and a fork are ready, he silently begins to eat. After finishing his meal in about 10 minutes, he heads to the bath. I prepare a bath towel and underwear for him and clean up after the meal. Then, my husband goes straight to the bedroom after his bath. He's always been a man of few words, but since his promotion, he seems more exhausted, and our conversations have become almost non-existent. Yet, I deeply trust and love him because he was there for me when I was at my lowest. I lost my father in middle school and my mother right after entering high school. My grandfather took me in and raised me like his own daughter. I loved my kind and warm grandfather with all my heart. When I became a working adult, I strongly wished to repay my grandfather for his kindness by taking him on trips and enjoying delicious meals together. The days I spent with my grandfather were incredibly happy, and I always wished for his health. However, 3 years into my career, my grandfather passed away from lung cancer, leaving me completely alone. Though I knew we would have to part ways someday, I never expected it to be so soon. I wanted to do more for my grandfather and spend more time with him. Overwhelmed by grief, I spent many nights crying. It was then that my boss at the time, who is now my husband, noticed my distress and supported me. My husband listened to me and offered comforting words, saying, "That must have been tough. You have done well." I'm truly grateful that he was my superior. Even though he's usually strict, he was particularly warm and encouraging at that moment. I'm convinced from the bottom of my heart that my husband truly has a warm heart. This fact is clear to me. That's why I sincerely wish to continue supporting my husband going forward. That's how I've been feeling lately. But then, something happened one afternoon on a day off. Our home phone rang. Hello, yes. Hey, it's your brother-in-law. The caller was my husband's brother. Oh, it's been a while. What's up? Actually, I need to talk to my brother. Is he there? Yes, just a moment. I relayed the message to my husband, who was relaxing in the living room. There's a call for you. Hello, hey, how are you? What's up? Unusually, my husband started smiling as soon as he began talking to his brother. He always shows special affection towards his brother, who is 15 years younger than him, got married to a beautiful woman 2 years ago and seems to be living a happy life. But what could have happened? Really? Is that so? Are you okay? My husband's tone suddenly became serious. I was curious about what was going on. Understood. If you're ever in trouble, don't hesitate to say something. You know, I'm your brother. With that, my husband ended the call. What happened? Is everything okay? It seems like my brother lost his job. What? He was fired. I was shocked. I hadn't expected this. Yes, I heard the company's situation wasn't great, but to be fired. My husband sat down, disappointed. I couldn't hide my own shock. My brother-in-law is very different from my husband. He's gentle and calm, always humble. He treats me like his real sister, and even when my husband belittles me in front of relatives, he'd say, "Brother, don't say things like that. It will make Amy sad," and apologize to me for my husband's rudeness. His wife is also wonderful, and I have a very positive impression of them as a couple. That he was fired. I wondered how we could possibly support my brother-in-law and his wife. I was filled with a desire to help and support them. Hey, is there anything I can do? Then, my husband looked at me coldly. What can you do? Well, I was thinking if there's anything we can do to help cheer up your brother a bit. My husband sighed deeply at my suggestion. You're really useless, aren't you? You might not understand because you lack social experience, but this is their toughest time. Saying thoughtlessly that we should help without understanding the situation is something I'd prefer outsiders to refrain from. His overly aggressive stance made me reflexively argue back. It seems my words intended as kindness angered him. Outsider? Aren't I part of the family too? I retorted to my husband. Family? You are my wife, but you have no relation to my brother. Irrelevant. An outsider. His words pierced my heart deeply. It was the first time my husband had been so aggressive. The fact that his brother had lost his job must have been a huge shock to him. However, I thought there was no need for him to speak like that. Just don't do anything unnecessary, he said before leaving the house. After that, my husband became even stricter towards me. What is this? You should learn from my brother's wife. What have you been doing at home today? While at home, my brother's wife manages to keep everything in order and perfectly handles the household chores. I had never seen my husband be so unreasonable before. What on earth happened? Can you just calm down a bit? What has gotten into you? I finally voiced my opinion to my husband. Quiet. Everything has become a mess because of you. My husband uttered such nonsensical things. It was incomprehensible. Eventually, we stopped having conversations or even exchanging glances, and the distance between us as a couple grew wider. Gradually, I began to doubt our relationship. On one such day, my husband was packing in the morning. Like doing a major cleaning, he sorted necessary from unnecessary items, and garbage bags piled up. I wondered what he was doing. However, our relationship had recently become so strained that I didn't have the energy to speak to him, so I didn't say anything about his actions. Unusually, my husband spoke to me. Hey, what are you doing? Get ready to. What? Ready for what? We're moving. We're giving this house to my brother and his wife. What are you talking about? According to my husband, we were to give our house, where we lived, to his brother and his wife, who were struggling after he lost his job. What? What do you mean? Don't do something so arbitrary. Shut up. Don't defy me. My husband shouted at me. However, I wasn't fazed. Didn't you want to do something for my brother too? That's completely different, isn't it? If we're giving away this house, where are we supposed to live? I asked my husband this question amidst my confusion. He replied nonchalantly, we can think about that later. What's important now is that my brother is facing a severe hardship. He needs the support of his brother right now. My husband was proceeding with things in a very self-centered manner, as if his decision was absolute. However, I knew that my brother-in-law was not the kind of person to kick us out and live in this house boldly. They are not like that. Why would my husband make such a decision? As I harbored this question, my husband said something unexpected to me. If you keep resisting, you're no longer needed in this house. My husband coldly stated. The next day, while I was irritably cleaning my husband's room, I found a completed divorce application. I had never imagined that my husband was trying to end our marriage. I was completely stunned by this unexpected action from my husband. But somewhere in my heart, I came to understand that this situation might be a meaningful turning point for us as a couple. I felt that there was no prospect of our relationship recovering if I stayed with my husband any longer. Therefore, I picked up the divorce application that I had dropped to the floor in shock and silently signed it. My husband would never dream that I would actually file for divorce. Imagining this unexpected turn of events, I somewhat smirked to myself. After signing that night, I finally resolved to confront my husband. Listen, do you remember that this house isn't your property? I asked him, and he responded with a puzzled, huh? This house is where I lived with my grandfather, and the land was inherited from him, who has passed away. Did you forget that I inherited it? My words left my husband visibly surprised. Considering this house is in my name, how do you plan to transfer it to your brother? I'd like to know. I pressed on with my questions. Well, my husband began to falter. Did you forget that fact? You started living in my house before we were married because you thought paying rent was a waste. I've been paying the property taxes on this house and land every year. You've never once contributed, have you? And yet, you decide to give it away without consulting me. I challenged him. No, that's because. He stumbled over his words. Enough. Once this application is submitted, the divorce will be official. Then, we'll truly be strangers. I declared calmly, presenting the divorce application in front of him. Wait, let's talk this over calmly, he said hastily. Calm down? That's my line. I'm appalled that you'd prepare a divorce application so easily. Your selfishness is astonishing. I unleashed all the grievances I had been holding back. I had once loved my husband wholeheartedly and believed he loved me too. But perhaps that was my misunderstanding. I never expected our marriage could end so easily. Amy, wait, you're misunderstanding something. Let's talk this through properly. Talk about what exactly? It was you who proposed divorce, wasn't it? I no longer have any love left for you. Declaring so, I carefully placed the divorce application in an envelope. I planned to submit it to the city hall first thing in the morning, using the weekend. My husband collapsed to the floor in dismay. I never imagined it would come to this. He murmured in a dazed voice. Without any sympathy for him, I firmly stated, this is my house. Leave quickly. Once the divorce application is submitted, we will be strangers. It's impossible for strangers to live under the same roof. My husband continued to resist until the moment he left the house, but my resolve was firm. He was now a stranger. There was no reason for sympathy. Even as my husband pleaded with tears, my heart was unmoved. Eventually, he left the house as if resigning himself. Our divorce became quickly known at his workplace. He began to receive cold looks, and various rumors sparked by the divorce spread, seemingly making him lose his place at work. Who spread such rumors? I merely answered questions from his colleagues and subordinates, without taking any further actions. Then, one day, half a year after the divorce, on my way back from visiting a real estate agency, I unexpectedly encountered an unwelcome person. It was my former husband, now to be referred to as my ex-husband. It appeared as if he had been waiting for me to come out of the real estate agency. His behavior gave me an eerie feeling. Because he persistently followed me, I couldn't ignore him, and I ultimately chose to speak with him. Enough already. If you have something to say it quickly. I pressed him for an answer. Amy, actually, I've been resenting you for a long time. My husband glared at me and suddenly said this. What? I was baffled by his sudden statement. As he explained, it turned out that my husband blamed me for his brother's job loss. How is that my fault? I asked him. Ever since we got married, misfortunes have piled up. That's what he said. Indeed, since our marriage, his parents had passed away, and he had also injured himself, among other misfortunes. However, his father had been hospitalized before our marriage, and his mother had always been frail. Moreover, his injury was due to him falling while drunk, breaking his wrist, which was entirely his own fault. Despite this, he seemed to believe I was the cause of his misfortune. Learning that my husband blamed all his bad luck on me left me utterly astounded. So, you hated me because you thought I was the cause of your misfortune? I forgave you, thinking you were just clumsy, but you actually just resented me. I was disappointed with his attitude. He always blamed others, a truly self-centered person. Without any basis, he just blamed others. I couldn't understand how he managed to hold a managerial position at work. I was worried if his subordinates were also unfairly blamed for unreasonable reasons. When had the superior I once trusted changed into such a person? And I felt a bit pitiful for having married such a person. But since divorcing you, bad luck has indeed continued. What kind of bad luck specifically? When I asked, he rolled up his sleeve to show me. His skin was scarred from burns. Actually, there was a fire in the apartment I lived in 3 months ago. Not only that, I also lost my wallet, and I've been making mistakes at work. Moreover, things haven't been going well with my brother recently, and we haven't been in contact. In other words, his misfortune continued even after our divorce. It's no surprise. Honestly, even hearing about his troubles, I couldn't muster any sympathy for his misfortune, because all of it was a result of his own actions. It had nothing to do with me. Please, Amy, I want you to come back. I'm nothing without you. Remember? We were together as a couple, and when you were working as a salaryman, I supported you in many ways, right? And when your grandfather passed away, I was there to support you a lot, he said, trying to guilt-trip me. The misfortune you're facing is the result of your own actions, right? Why don't you reflect on yourself? You should really do something about your bad habit of always blaming others, I told him and walked away. Amy, wait, Amy, he called out, trying to stop me, but I pretended not to know him and disappeared into the crowd. About a week later, I received a call from the person who used to be my brother-in-law. Amy, I guess I can't call you sister anymore. Actually, I have something to talk about regarding my brother. According to my brother-in-law, the decision to give our house to his brother was made unilaterally by my husband. My brother-in-law and his wife knew nothing about the plan. My brother has always had a tendency to show off, and I've been worried about his personality for a long time. The way he treated you, Amy, was terrible, and it was painful to watch as his brother. He said, he truly was a kind-hearted person. I wonder why there's such a difference in personality between the brothers. I don't know if it's my place to say this, but I feel you made the right decision by divorcing. I hope you find happiness, Amy. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Later, I heard that my former brother-in-law fortunately found a job quickly and seemed to be managing to make ends meet. I was truly relieved. I've decided to keep some distance from my brother. It seems my brother-in-law had his own thoughts. He mentioned gradually reducing interactions with his brother, who was my ex-husband. This was why my ex-husband had lost contact with his younger brother. After the divorce, being distanced by his closest brother, my ex-husband found himself in a state of loneliness. I hope one day he can understand the consequences of his actions. Before that, I have to completely disappear from my ex-husband's life. On the day I encountered my ex-husband, I had just signed a contract with a real estate agent to rent out the house I inherited from my grandfather. The house was too large for me to live in alone. However, I couldn't bear to part with the house filled with memories of my grandfather. I hoped to let someone who wanted to live there use the house. I changed my phone number and address, cutting off all ties with my ex-husband. Life still holds many possibilities for me. After all, I am only 35 years old. My name is Lindsay. I'm a 29-year-old company employee, and this year means I'm getting older still. I met Jake, a year older than me, through friends, and we decided to marry 6 months after we started dating. Jake, who made a name for himself in tennis during his student days, is an active person who continues to play tennis even now. As I was in the tennis club during my student days, we immediately found common ground together. Once we started dating, we would often play tennis together on the weekends. One day, after our date, Jake proposed to me and we decided to get married. It's been almost 3 years since we got married. We don't have children, but we bought an apartment after getting married and have been living together ever since. Both of us work, and while we aren't struggling financially, we can't say that we're wealthy either. We're living a happy life. However, something happened between us that shattered my peaceful days. One day, Jake suddenly asked me to come to his parents' house. Surprised, I hurried there to find Jake, his parents, and an unknown woman waiting for me. As I struggled to understand the situation, Jake suddenly knelt down and said, "Lindsay, I'm truly sorry. The truth is, I've been involved with this woman here, Olivia. Last week, we found out that Olivia is pregnant. I feel responsible for her and the baby. So I think it's better that we separate. I'm sorry, but I want a divorce." Jake shocked me with this revelation. Exposed to his infidelity, the pregnancy, and faced with his demands for divorce, I was stunned. That was when my mother-in-law spoke to me. "Lindsay, please forgive Jake. Yes, he cheated, but the problem lies with you too. You and Jake weren't really a good match from the beginning. So, I'm sorry, but please forget about him." And my father-in-law added, "Olivia's father is an executive at a major company. A man in a totally different position from someone like your poor father. I think you know who's more suitable for our son." I couldn't believe it. Jake's father belittled not only me, but also my father too. Normally, parents would put the blame on their son for cheating, but Jake's parents didn't seem to think that way. Instead, they seemed to think it was natural for us to divorce, and that their son had done nothing wrong. I took the divorce papers and said, "I understand what you all want to say. Being with people who have such warped thoughts might affect me too. I'm shocked at how you make it seem like I'm the villain despite Jake's infidelity. Don't worry, I'll file these divorce papers myself. I'll leave the rest to a lawyer." And with that, I quickly left the scene. As I left, my father-in-law mockingly said, "A poor person hiring a lawyer? What a waste of time and money, when she doesn't even have any. She shouldn't bite off more than she can chew." Ha ha ha. Ignoring him, I left his parents' house and immediately went to City Hall to file the divorce papers. At least I was able to end my marriage with Jake. The next day, surprisingly, Jake and Olivia came to my apartment. Seeing me, Jake said, "Oh, you're still here? You haven't even packed your things. You're taking your time, aren't you?" Hearing this, Olivia also looked at me curiously. I was furious at Jake's words. "What are you talking about? You're the one who should be taking it slow. This is my house, so you should be the one to leave. The movers are coming soon to take all your belongings to your parents' house. If there's anything you don't want them to touch, you should take it now," I retorted. Hearing this, Jake suddenly panicked. "What? This is my house. The ownership should be in my name," he exclaimed. I was dumbfounded. After all, this apartment was bought in my name. I had already told Jake about this, and about my family's background before we got married. But it seems that Jake is the type to conveniently forget things that don't suit him. Perhaps this carefree nature is why he was easily swayed by Olivia. I showed the deed to the apartment and my name was clearly written on it. Jake's face quickly changed upon seeing it. Meanwhile, Olivia's face began to cloud over with anger. Jake, what is this all about? This is completely different from what you told me before. Were you deceiving me? Olivia began to confront him. This is strange. What's happening? Jake responded in confusion. That's not an answer. Explain yourself. Olivia pressed on. First, this is my house, so please take your argument outside. And just so you know, Jake has various debts. So if you're planning to marry him, be prepared for that burden. I calmly stated the facts to Olivia. Hearing this, Olivia seemed about to say something, but I didn't care and kicked both of them out of the room, slamming the door behind them. After a while, I could hear them arguing outside the door, but it eventually quieted down. About an hour later, the movers finally arrived and took all of Jake's belongings to his parents' house. The room was now clean, and I was relaxing in the newly organized space. But it was short-lived. Suddenly, the intercom rang repeatedly. I cautiously opened the door with the chain lock still on, and my mother-in-law was standing there. Hello, is there something you need? Lindsay, why did you keep such an important thing a secret? What are you talking about? I can't believe it, but Jake just told me that this apartment is in your name and that your parents are the owners of that famous restaurant chain. It seemed Jake finally remembered my family's circumstances. What about it? If I had known, I would never have let this divorce happen. A daughter from such a wealthy family, we would love to have you back in our family. Lindsay, please, reconsider and start over with Jake. I was shocked and at a loss for words at her outrageous request. I couldn't possibly agree to what she was asking. You really have a terrible way of thinking about things. Am I not a human being? Are you only interested in money? I'm sorry, but I don't want anything more to do with you. There's nothing more to talk about, so please leave, I said and attempted to close the door. But my mother-in-law, infuriated by my attitude, raised her voice in anger. Don't be so arrogant. I'm giving you my permission to reconcile your differences. Fix things with him right now. I won't leave this spot until you agree to get back together. Open this door immediately. She said this, pounding on the door repeatedly. I decided that I couldn't handle this alone and called the police. They came and took my mother-in-law away. Even as the officers were taking her, she was shouting something loudly, but I no longer cared to listen to her words. There was a reason why my in-laws were unaware of my family's business background. My father, coming from a poor background since childhood, continued to live modestly, even after becoming a company president. He never considered buying branded clothes. He always took great care of his belongings and used them for a long time. Hence, at our wedding, he wore a suit he had bought decades ago. Seeing this, my in-laws assumed that my father was not financially well off and misunderstood his restaurant chain as a small, privately owned business. As a result, they never delved deeper into my father's business. Time went by without them understanding the true circumstances of my family. Days after managing to send my mother-in-law home, Jake tried to persuade me to reconcile our differences. His persistence was incredibly exhausting. It was surprising how insistent he was, despite the fact that he was the one who proposed the divorce. He seems to have a talent for quickly forgetting inconvenient truths. I opened the door, keeping the chain lock on, and Jake, upon seeing me, began to speak with teary eyes. Lindsay, please, let's give it another try. Everything is my fault. I'm truly sorry. I still love you. Let's be together again. He then explained a sudden turn of events. Olivia had apparently approached Jake aiming to get his house, pretending to be pregnant to sway him. However, once she learned about Jake's considerable debts, she gave up and fled. And now, Jake was coming to me to seek reconciliation. Huh? What are you saying? I don't know anything about that. How can you say that? After you cheated and brought up divorce, now that she's left you, you want to get back together? There's no limit to your audacity. I have no intention of getting back together with you. Don't ever come here again. I refused Jake right there and then. Surprisingly, he quietly left. However, This was not to be their last attempt. Days later, Jake's entire family unexpectedly showed up at my workplace. They were shouting, "Bring out Lindsay! Get that woman out here! We know she's here!" Causing chaos in the office and leading to the security guards being called. I stood there, dumbfounded by the situation. But they wouldn't have things their way any longer. I worked at the headquarters of my father's company, and that day, my father was also in the office. All of my colleagues also supported me. "Hey, what are you doing? This is my company. Don't just barge in and make a scene. I know everything you did to demean my daughter. Don't ever come near her again, and never set foot in this company again." My usually calm father shouted furiously at my ex-in-laws. Everyone, including the employees and Jake's family, must have been surprised at the anger of my father, who usually only shows his gentle and calm side. Sorry. We're really sorry." Jake's family desperately apologized. My father's stern words had immediately quieted them down. As they were being escorted out by security, my father shouted in a strong voice, "Don't you ever come here again, and never do something like this again. I won't allow it. You understand?" Hearing this, I couldn't stop myself from crying. I felt a deep sense of gratitude that my father had gotten so angry for my sake. Later, through the company's legal advisor, I decided to seek damages from Jake's family. I sought damages for the divorce due to Jake's infidelity, for his persistent attempts at reconciliation after the divorce, and for the disturbance at my workplace. The total amount was substantial, and I eventually received payment from them. I also made them sign a written agreement promising never to come before me again. Jake's family's state of affairs rapidly declined thereafter. Chased by the money owed to me and Jake's existing debts, they ended up selling their home and moving far away. In town, the story spread that Jake had committed adultery, divorced his wife, and after being abandoned by his mistress, attempted to reconcile. Facing such embarrassment, they could no longer stay in this town. While I felt a bit of sympathy for them, I also knew that everything was a consequence of their actions, so it was clearly deserved. Jake's family never appeared before me again. Finally, I was able to resume my peaceful days. However, my father had harsh words for me as well regarding what had happened. He blamed me for not recognizing before the marriage that Jake was a person who would commit adultery and accrue debts. Certainly, while Jake was at fault, my lack of insight was also partly to blame. Unable to argue with my father, I felt disappointed and disillusioned with marriage. I felt that I needed to give my heart a break. However, about a year later, I decided to marry my colleague, Matt. Matt was sincere and earnest in his work, trusted by everyone. I was initially attracted by his personality, but as we started dating, I was also drawn to his lifestyle. His life was surprisingly simple. He never indulged in branded items, used everyday things for a long time, but generously spent money and spoiled me on dates. His behavior was very similar to my father's. My father, who usually saves money, would splurge on family trips, bringing us joy. I deeply loved and respected my father. Realizing Matt's actions were similar to my father's, I felt that I could be happy with him in the future. Therefore, I decided to marry Matt. I was worried about being scolded by my father for remarrying within a year of my divorce, but his reaction was surprisingly positive, probably because he had heard of Matt's reputation at work and knew of his character. There was nothing bad said about Matt, and from my father's perspective as the company president, Matt seemed to be performing exceptionally well. "I feel confident that Matt will take good care of you, Lindsay," my father told me happily. Matt and I were happily married. Not long after our marriage, we discovered that I was with a child. The happiest person to hear this news was undoubtedly my father. I was so glad to see my father happy. Reflecting on my time with Jake, where we didn't have children even after 3 years of marriage, it seemed like a stroke of luck. Matt and I plan to take over the company in the future. We are currently learning the basics of management from my father. Although there are many challenges, We accept that they are our responsibility as successors, and we are working hard together. We believe that we will need even more effort for the sake of our upcoming child, despite all that's happened. I am now very happy. Together with my family, we intend to firmly support this company in the future.